quite getting done. We'll wrap that up in just a moment, and then we'll go into our topic in just a very few minutes on the problem of fake archaeology. Yes, there is such a thing. Boy, you better believe there's such a thing. I think a lot of us already have an idea. Whenever we've seen something on the History Channel with aliens in archaeology, or they're the fourth Indiana Jones movie, I don't count that as canon. Aliens, really? Okay. Well, I guess, Indiana Jones is not really about archaeology. Let's go ahead and talk about with Jesus, the archaeology of his death, because that, of course, is the pivotal thing in his life, his death and his resurrection. And archaeology, what do we expect to find? Well, the Bible actually gives us a lot of information if we're looking for a place. And where was Jesus crucified and buried? Of course, understand up front, even if we find the spot, can we use that to prove that he died on the cross and rose from the dead? No. This is not about, we cannot prove or anything. Archaeology cannot speak to his divinity or his power. That's a matter of faith. But we can verify that the things the Bible describes, places and things, did exist. And there are a lot of other benefits to archaeology. We're going to talk about those tomorrow. How can we use archaeology besides just, cool points or maybe, feel-good things for myself? There's much more to archaeology than that, and much more that benefits Christians in terms of what we do and how we teach, how we respond, and the way we understand the scriptures beyond just places or events or things. But there are basically two locations in Jerusalem that people hold up and consider, this is where Jesus died and was buried. One of them has a lot more credibility than the other. And archaeology helps us with that. What does the Bible tell us about where he was crucified and buried? Actually, quite a bit compared to most other things. In John, it says he was crucified at a place called Golgotha, which is Aramaic for place of the skull. So why would they call it place of the skull? Doesn't explain it, but at least there's something to consider in there. Mentions also Luke 23, the place called the skull. Maybe it's because there were executions. Maybe it looked like a skull in some way. John 19 says it was near the city of Jerusalem. And Hebrews makes a point of Jesus suffering outside the gate, just as sins were atoned for outside the camp. And so if we understand that maybe as partly a literal explanation, it was outside the city, but that's consistent. They didn't execute people inside the city. Near the city, outside the gate somewhere. So that makes sense. It was a new tomb, which means we're talking a period of the Roman period. Tombs from the Old Testament times were designed differently. They used them differently. Tombs in the Roman period, the New Testament period, had very distinctive features we don't find before or after. Cut out of the rock, and there's a great stone, which is typical for Roman period tombs. In the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and this new tomb was in the garden. And so that's a detail. And maybe we can take all these things and cross them, and it can limit some things, and maybe even help us identify a probable location. One of the two places is called Gordon's Cavern. It's just north of the old city of Jerusalem. Some people think this is where Jesus was crucified. And it goes back to the 1800s, really. There was a guy in the late 1700s who suggested it. But the 1800s, there's a British general named Gordon sitting on the walls of the old city, sipping his tea one day. He looked and noticed the rock in this area, back then in the 1800s, looked from a certain angle a bit like a skull. And he began, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is the place of the skull. And when you get the right angle, that rock formation above those carves used to look kind of like a skull if you look at it the right way. There's a picture of how it looked about 80 years ago. And maybe the eyes at the top, and the very bottom is the mouth, and maybe in the center a little slight ridge like a nose. And maybe some of you are saying, I don't know exactly. And today it's eroded a lot more with pollution and so forth, and just natural erosion from water and air. And the nose fell off a few years ago, a part of it did. Doesn't really look like a skull anymore. But in the 1800s, some people thought it did, and that must be Golgotha. But maybe it is. And they found a tomb around the corner from it and thought, well, this looks like a place. They planted a garden, And this tomb, a lot of people go there today. They walk in the tomb and are told this is where Jesus was probably crucified. And if you turn around and look, there's a rolling stone. Fantastic. Except there are a couple of problems. First of all, if this looked like a skull maybe 150 years ago, but doesn't now because of erosion, take away 2,000 years of erosion. Did it look like a skull in Jesus' time? We don't know. That's kind of a stretch, isn't it? But also this tomb, it was excavated in the 1950s. It turned out it's from the Old Testament period. And it was reused in the Crusader period. It's not a Roman period tomb. It was already hundreds of years old in the time of Jesus. So this couldn't be the new tomb being talked about. There's a garden there today, but that's new. They put that in the area to recreate the setting of Jesus for tourists. That rolling stone was brought in from a different tomb. It doesn't even belong to that tomb. So, they kind of know it. But it feels like the place. It's quiet, away from the city noise. It's kind of sequestered. And it feels like the place you'd want it to feel like for Jesus' death and burial. But it's likely not it. There's nothing there to connect it with the details Scripture gives us. There is another location, though, that if you look at the archaeology of the original area, it matches everything. And Christians in the area preserve the memory, the tradition of this being it, as far back as the 1st century, which is pretty close to the original time. It's in the middle of the old city of Jerusalem today, underneath those 2 great domes. There's a big church built there originally, built by Constantine in the 300s. This site originally, it was outside the city walls in Jesus' time. There was this kind of big rock there. It had been a quarry originally, but one section of rock was very poor quality, so they didn't quarry it, left it there. And maybe that looks kind of like a skull, perhaps. We're guessing on that. But later on, when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, they rebuilt it eventually. The Emperor Hadrian filled in this whole area, which had tombs in it, and the Christians remembered that as Jesus' tomb in that area and the place of his crucifixion. But Hadrian filled it in, built a Greco-Roman temple on top of it, a pagan temple, and it stayed there until the time of Constantine in the 300s, the 3 centuries after Jesus. Constantine converted to Christianity. He wanted to build, he sent his mom over there with a bunch of money, and then she came, where was Jesus crucified and buried? And the local Christians said, well, underneath all this stuff here, there was a rock, and there are some tombs, and that's where it happened. My grandfather learned from his grandfather, from his great-grandfather. The memory was preserved over 3 centuries, even though the place was covered up. Constantine's people dug it all out. They found the tombs and the rock as tradition preserved. So they built a big church building over it to mark the spot. That building was burned down and destroyed, but it was rebuilt and repaired. Today, there's still a building. It's kind of ugly and a mess, but it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And you go inside, it's very Catholic looking. There are about 6 different kinds of churches: Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Ethiopian, Egyptian. They all share the space. Sometimes fist fights break out amongst the priests because someone touched someone else's stuff, things like that. Not a very inspiring place, but it probably is the location because there's also been archaeology. In the time of Jesus, it was an unused quarry outside the walls. It contained Roman period tombs, and we can still see evidence today. Excavations found a layer of black garden soil that was not native to the area. The typical reddish brown soil in the area, there's this black soil there. Someone brought in to plant a garden, apparently. There were seeds in the soil, ancient seeds that were found. There was a garden there. And we have this very strong tradition that apparently was remembered back as early as the 1st century. We can't always put a lot of stock in tradition, but sometimes they preserve local memories. And in this case, it seems they did. Even though it was built into the building for over 200 years, locals still remembered under all that is where Jesus was killed and buried. We dug it up, and it was as the memory described. Inside the building, they have all these shrines, miniatures. We look at the left and right, you see like a rock underneath those statues. That's the top of that rock. You go inside this building, climb some steps, and they built the building over this rock, which may be the origin of the skull. We don't know for sure. That's the top of it. Underneath, in the middle, you can stick your hand in and touch the top of the rock. if you're inclined to that sort of thing. Go to another part of the building, look down. When Constantine built his building, they decided which tomb was the one Jesus was in. It was this one. They picked one. Don't know if it's actually the tomb. They cut away the other tombs around it and built a little thing on top of it to preserve it. And that thing's been rebuilt a few times. But inside is a tomb, and it is a Roman period tomb. It's all decorated inside now. We don't know for sure if it was Jesus' actual tomb. If it wasn't, it was nearby. If you know where to look, you can find some Roman period tombs that have not been built over, like these. I took this photo in a different part of the building, and one person from my group even demonstrated the use of those burial shafts one time. If you want to get a picture for back home. And so, if this wasn't Jesus' actual tomb, it was part of the same complex of tombs, probably. So, probably this is the site. We can never know 100%, but archaeology, mixed with the details in the Bible, match. And so this is probably the area where he was crucified and buried. Not that it makes a difference, but at least we have that. And at least the Bible describes it, it seems, accurately, and it matches the tradition. How about, let's do one more thing, baptism. We know what baptism is. We talk about baptism, immersion. Here's the question. In Acts chapter 2, how many people were baptized in Acts chapter 2? 3,000, right? Where did they baptize them? In Jerusalem. Where do you baptize 3,000 people? Because Jerusalem has no river. There's no lake. It's not on the coast. If you go to Egypt, there's the Nile River. If you go to a lot of places, they're built on a river, built on the coast. You have a natural place to baptize large numbers of people. Jerusalem's in the mountains. There's no river there. Where do you baptize 3,000 people? A lot in just one day. Archaeology helps us because Jews are very serious about washing. And there's a comment in Mark about how serious the Pharisees and the Jews were about washing all the time. You wash before your meals. You wash before you go to synagogues. And before you go to synagogues, in fact, you know what you do? Before you go to the temple or the synagogues for Sabbath, you baptize yourself. Wherever Jews lived back in that time period, and even observant Jews today, they have what's called a mikvah. Mikvah is a Hebrew word for a baptistry. Wherever you have a Jewish community, they had these little stone things carved in and filled with water. And before you go into the temple, before you go into the synagogue, you go in and immerse yourself, all your body underwater, and come back up, and then you're ritually considered clean for worship. It didn't wash your sins away, but it was a ritual thing. The priests in the Old Testament were always washing. One of the pieces of equipment in the tabernacle of the temple was a big wash basin outside filled with water, so they could wash. And the Jews, in the time of Jesus, purified themselves ritually by immersing themselves in a mikvah. And there are tons of them. These are ones near the temple. Actually, this is one in Capernaum. There are several in Capernaum by the synagogue there. I'm sorry, not Capernaum. Oh, there's one there too, but in Magdala. They found several. Here's my oldest daughter when she was 11, demonstrating how to use a mikvah, though there's no water in it. But you go down the steps and you come back up. In fact, you see the little barrier on the steps in the middle? You go down one side, unclean, you immerse yourself, you go up the other side, so you're not bumping into each other, and you bump someone who's unclean, you're unclean again. You have to repeat. So in some of these, you see a barrier like this one. This is right by the Temple Mount. In fact, that building in the background is the Temple Mount. And so people going to the temple would immerse themselves in this one. Down one side, immerse yourself, go up the other side. There's another one near the Temple Mount, and another one with some rainwater in it today, by the Temple Mount. Where do you baptize 3,000 people by the Temple Mount in Acts chapter 2? Go out to the mikvahs. We found over 100 around the Temple Mount in archaeology. Use those mikvahs. They're already used for immersion. When they're talking about being baptized, people say baptism. What's that? They knew what it was. They did it all the time. This one, though, was in the name of Jesus for the remission of sins. And that made it different once for all time. When Peter talked about that, they knew what he was talking about. They went to the mikvahs and did it. This may have been one of the ones used in Acts chapter 2. There's that one again, but here's a big one near the Temple Mount. Maybe they use that one. You come from all sides at the same time and baptize a lot of people if you need to. So maybe they use this one in Acts chapter 2. And so the pool of Siloam, with the blind man, in fact, he might have even been a mikvah, but he went in and washed in the pool of Siloam. So, question answered, and archaeology gives us insight. They all knew it was immersion in a pool. When we use a baptistry or something, or immersion today, we're taking this old practice, and like a lot of things, Jesus took old practices and repurposed it, or gave a fresh meaning to it. So archaeology helps us with the gospel. And finally, is Jesus the Son of God? We believe he is. Archaeology doesn't prove that. But this gives us reasons to put our faith in the Bible. It describes things accurately. We find things the Bible describes in archaeology. And so there we go. Okay, let's go ahead and move on now to our final topic for the day. Archaeology, fake archaeology. Okay, and if we finish in time, we might have an opportunity for a couple of questions. I don't know, I've already run over, so if we don't have time for questions and answers here, you can ask me afterwards. I'm happy to answer anything that I'm able to. If I don't know, I won't make it up. I'll just tell you I don't know. But TV archaeology. It's easy to find archaeology shows on TV with fascinating titles like Secrets of the Bible or Mysteries of the Bible. And you go back, movies are popular. The Exodus, Charlton Heston meeting, the Israelites away from Gilbringer out of Egypt. But be careful, because there's a lot of misinformation. Who makes the decision on content for documentaries or TV shows or movies? It's the movie people, the media people, the documentary makers. What is their goal? Well, some of them are more honest than others, but even the honest ones have in their minds, we need viewers. We want people to watch this. Archaeologists are trained. What does it actually say? Sometimes it sounds a little boring for public audiences. Media people are trained to make it interesting. And some are more careful than others, some are less careful. But be careful. For example, this is one probably a number of you have seen. TV archaeology. Have any of you seen these pictures or know what these are said to possibly be? Chariot wheels on the bottom of the Red Sea. Have you ever heard? We found chariot wheels in the bottom of the Red Sea. This is where Pharaoh's army was destroyed during the Exodus. The Israelites went across, Pharaoh chased him with his army, and the waters came in, and we have chariot wheels. That's not what this is. They're not chariot wheels. Never believe that. Never believe it, because it's not true. We see that on TV, we see it on Facebook. Every so often it gets repeated or refreshed. Just yesterday in the news, a new thing came out. I saw it on the internet, a news site. Archaeologists have discovered proof of the Exodus of Mount Sinai. No, it's an old idea that someone else grabbed and wrote about again. It's been around for years. It included some of this. This is not true. Egyptian chariot wheels were made of wood, not metal. They corroded. This is an area that's been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. Shipping, who knows what's come down over thousands of years in there, washed down. These are not chariot wheels. And if you're going to make a claim like that, you need to bring it up and test it and show everyone, yeah, that's what it is, not something else. And they never do that. They've never done that with a chariot wheel. They show you the pictures of these round things underwater, and they leave them there. They don't test it. They don't verify anything. That's a warning sign. So that's probably fake archaeology. It's not proof of the Exodus. Have you ever seen photos like this? Giant skeletons. There are people excavating skeletons of giants like these. They're fake. They're photoshopped. They're not real. We've never found anywhere in archaeology ever proof of giants. We haven't. No proof so far. No evidence, no physical evidence of a 9-foot-tall Goliath or anything like that. If people like that existed, maybe they existed, we've never found evidence. There's no proof, no evidence of it. These are all fakes. And how about archaeology? Noah's archaeology. There have been many sightings or many claims about Noah's Ark over many years in many different places. What should we expect to find? That's a good question. But here's one that's come up again recently. I saw this again just last week. It's been around. There's this rock formation near Mount Ararat, and the dimensions in some ways kind of match. and maybe the rock petrified over the wood. And this has been claimed by several people. It's never been claimed by actual trained archaeologists. Geologists have got out there and say it's just a natural rock formation that looks kind of boat-like. You know, it happens to be close to the right size. But is that Noah's Ark? You have the demonstrator. Give us a reason. You know, if we're going to make a claim, what do we have? What do we claim? There's a gap. Mind the gap. And to say this is Noah's Ark, okay, we need to have demonstration. Give us reasons why we should believe it's that specific thing and not something else. And that's what we should do with everything. If we're looking at physical evidence, look at physical evidence. Bring in specialists who are trained in these things, and not someone who learned it, sitting on their couch. One of the biggest components of this is that as Noah's Ark, he's not an archaeologist, he's not a geologist. He was a former nurse esthetician who got interested in archaeology and got into TV. He's the one who promoted this more than anyone else. You know, maybe they can make it sound convincing, pull the details out, but make it sound compelling, but be cautious. Here's another example from a few years ago, a group from Hong Kong, NAMI, Noah's Ark Ministries International. And as their name suggests, their focus is finding the Ark of Noah. Chinese people from Hong Kong, a number of years ago, they said they found Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat. They went up there with a film crew, and they had pictures of themselves, a local Kurdish guy from the area in parachute. That's just a coincidence, his name is Parachute. And they have pictures of a wooden structure they went in, they're exploring. There's a cave, but they found out later, after the film crew went there, took pictures and tried to start making a documentary, announced it to the world. People asked questions. It turned out Parachute was defrauding them. He paid other people to go up there, bring wood and arrange it there and make it look old. And in one of the pictures even had a spider web, an old spider web that had been cleared out up in Arctic conditions. That was a giveaway right there. That didn't stay, that came from down below somewhere. And he finally confessed. He defrauded them. And of course, they felt very badly about it. The group in Hong Kong was sincere. And they felt probably embarrassed and upset, naturally, as anyone would be. But it was old wood that someone put up there and arranged, and then made a claim. And people went looking for the Ark, well-meaning people, brought cameras, and took these kinds of pictures before it was all revealed to be a setup. And if you look at a history of people who've claimed to find Noah's Ark, it's a pretty long list. Some of these are known fakes or frauds. Some of these were done by well-meaning people. Whether a photo from the air or something else. You look more closely at this list, and you go back to the 1850s. They go through the early 1900s and World War I and World War II. And you have a lot of people who are flying air patrols and planes with cameras, and they see something. Maybe that's Noah's Ark. It looks at the photo like it could be a boat, things like that. And you go a little further down and get into the later 20th century, and a lot of pilots involved in those things, claiming sightings. Let's ask the question. There have been people recently who claiming they have Noah's Ark, and maybe we'll find it someday. Maybe one of these is real. But what should we expect to find? I guess what we typically say is, well, around Mount Ararat, we should find something like a boat made out of wood, right? Is that what we should find? Well, Ararat, the name comes from another word that in other texts is pronounced or rendered Urartu. And Urartu, or Ararat, the consonants are the same, vowels change between languages sometimes. The words are describing the same place. It was not the name of a mountain. It was, in Old Testament times, the name of a region, an ancient kingdom that went from northern Iran today all the way over up to the Black Sea. A number of different mountains, a pretty decent-sized region. And if you look at the literal Hebrew, it says the ark came to rest in the mountains of Urartu, or in Ararat. You have the different language, and the vowel sounds come out a little differently. It's not just one mountain. It's a whole region that stretched many miles across Urartu. It wasn't until the 1800s or so that someone identified one mountain as Mount Ararat. But go back 300 years and before, There's not a Mount Ararat. There's a region of Urartu, much bigger. Just a few hundred years ago, someone tried to identify a mountain, but other peoples in the area who've been there for centuries or longer, they don't call that mountain, the one we have been told is Ararat, they don't call it Mount Ararat. They have other names for it. Local names that lasted long before Westerners or someone decided it was Mount Ararat. So are we even looking in the right place? Do we even know specifically where to look? The truth is we don't. Any sources that try to narrow it down are much, much later. Something else to keep in mind, if it's a moist environment, wood tends to decompose. Now, maybe if it's a very frozen environment, maybe if there's constant ice, that will preserve it, possibly. Is the region we're looking for where the ark rested, was that very quickly frozen over and preserved? We have no way of knowing. And something else to keep in mind, after the flood, Noah and his family and others who came from them, one of the biggest needs, most immediate needs, is wood for cooking fires, for fires for altars. Noah built an altar and sacrificed. Wood to build animal shelters and pens, maybe structures to live in. Wood is scarce after the major flood. Where are you going to get lumber and enough wood for all the fires you have to make each day, and for your residents, for places to raise animals? Well, the ark's made of pre-cut wood. Probably the easiest thing is to start disassembling the ark and using that for building, for burning. Was the ark recycled? How much will we expect to find? So that's a question that is very fair to ask. Would we even expect to find a boat anymore? Due to weather or due to human habitation needing the wood, or both? Maybe there's nothing left to be found. Maybe it was stripped apart in large part or entirely. So big claims need big evidence. If someone finds the ark or says we had the ark, maybe. But what do we have and what is claimed? How big is that gap? We need to be very careful, because there have been enough times where well-meaning people, believers, claim to have found the ark, and it turned out not to be what they thought it was. And it makes Christians look, to skeptics, it makes us look bad. And that actually can work against our efforts to teach the gospel, to convince people to put trust in the word of God. So caution, wisdom, prudence. If we're going to make a claim, produce something, make it public. And then don't assume that, well, everyone who's not a believer in the Bible just hates it. They'll try to rig the test. They don't want there to be an ark. No, if someone actually found an ark and it turned out to be a real thing, how much money and fame and publicity will be involved? Even non-believers, if you have a chance to become famous and rich, man, they're going to jump on it. If there's something there, let's see it. Well, we found David's name in ancient inscription. There wasn't some conspiracy to discredit it. Even people who don't trust the Bible, except, yeah, that's David's name. We have evidence. Of course it was David's name. And most people out there are honest. And if we're going to make a claim, let's be cautious about promoting it or grabbing onto it until it's been demonstrated. With anything, including the ark. Because there's been enough fake claims or innocently mistaken claims to create a problem. If there's no shared evidence that we can test, then let's be cautious about believing. Even if it's people we trust or think we believe as we do. Big claims need evidence that we can see and test. It could be anything. Mind the gap. Okay, let's go to something else. Speaking of documentaries, this is what this came out again yesterday in relation to the Red Sea and all that. There's a documentary out there on YouTube. You can watch it for free. Finding the Mountain of Moses, the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. And basically, it claims that the real Mount Sinai is not the place we have it traditionally in the Sinai Peninsula. Some people think they found the real one over in Saudi Arabia. In the long scheme of things, does it matter where Mount Sinai was for us? No, it doesn't. But still, if we found the real one, that's kind of neat. And it's nice. And maybe we can learn something. Maybe some archaeology that could reveal more about the time period or something about a Bible story. But first of all, this documentary, it's a newer one on YouTube. But if you can read it, who produces it? The Ryan Morrow Show. Who's Ryan Morrow? He's not an archaeologist. He's not an ancient historian. He's not an anthropologist. He's not a geologist. He's not any of those things. They look at the description. Here's the description, the summary. Watch new and undeniable archaeological evidence of the real location of Mount Sinai. Ryan Morrow and the Doubting Thomas Research Foundation take on to the actual location of the book of Exodus. That's a big claim. Undeniable archaeological evidence. It means there's no reason to disbelieve it. That's big talk from someone who's not an archaeologist. And he's making a documentary. But what's his background? He doesn't chariot wheels under the water, by the way. That's one of the photos that it claims to say wheels with an axle and the coral preserve the shape. Again, we'll bring it up. Let's take a look at it. They never do that. And so, going to make a big claim. Let's test it and see if it's what we say it is. Because this area has been inhabited for thousands of years. Boats sailing and occasionally sinking for thousands of years. There are no samples. Wood tends to disintegrate in water unless it's an anaerobic environment, no oxygen. It's buried or something. And some people say, well, they're metal wheels. Yeah, but only for ceremonies, like the King Tut's tomb, a golden chariot. That's not the one he took out the field. Egyptian chariot wheels are made of wood. They decomposed. So if it's a metal wheel, it wouldn't be out in the field anyway. But undeniable archaeological evidence. When you watch the video, you can watch it later on YouTube if you want. We don't have time to watch it here. I've watched it. I didn't count the number of times, but it's a lot. We have words like possibly. The locals say this could be, it may be. See, every one of those phrases is hedged. Some doubt. It might be. And many times this documentary says this might have been an altar that Moses used. And then the very next thing pretends that it actually is undeniable and moves on to make a point based on that. Or local people say, there's never any actual archaeology presented. There's never any archaeologists in this video. No one with any credentials or training in anything. It's TV guys. Ryan Morrow was formerly in television as the national security guy at Fox News. They bring him on to talk about stuff like with Iraq or Afghanistan or something in the Middle East. That's his background. Not archaeology or anything related to it. No training in it. He's a TV guy. And he relies heavily on legends, local myths, what the local people tell him. And remember, local people, if this turns out to be around Mount Sinai, tourism, they get to have visitors come and give them money for services. So there might be a motive as well. A lot of questions that are not considered. And here's one section of from the article talking about this. There's an ancient altar site with uncut granite stones at the base of the mountain. The remains of what appear to be small ancient pillars. But were they really small ancient pillars? You see, in the description, what appeared to be. But has anyone actually studied it and say, yes, these match pillars we've done at other sites? Moses is said to have built an altar made of uncut stones at the base of Mount Sinai, and the Bible sets up 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. So far, 9 pillars have been found. Do we see the problem there? Local people say there used to be 12, but there's no evidence of it. And they appear to be pillars, and the Bible says Moses set up pillars, so this must be it, but we actually only have 9. See how many gaps there are in there between what we have and how they're, we should understand it this way. The whole documentary is like that. The altar, by the way, was actually excavated years ago, and it was dated to after Jesus' time, not before Jesus, not Moses' time, but after Jesus. So they're ignoring that in the documentary. There are massive boulders making up this altar, massive boulders. Yet Exodus says that the altar there was built by Aaron himself. One man moving the 3-ton boulders? No, doesn't match the Bible. It talks about close to the mountain, there are pictures drawn on rocks, pictographs, petroglyphs of what appear to be people and animals. And the interpretation is maybe it's showing like tags of the golden calf worship and people drawing pictures of the event. And it says, They're in this specific area by the mountain. It's not like they're carved all over the mountain, just this one spot. And so that's what he says in the documentary. What he does not say is that, yeah, by the mountain, they have these little pictures in this one spot. But if you look at the region of Saudi Arabia, we have these kinds of pictures all over the place, at different places. Over 300 different locations, they have petroglyphs like this besides this mountain. And people have already analyzed and researched them, and they've been dated to before Moses' time, according to the archaeologists and specialists who've studied them in other places before this documentary was made. And it's an area that's been continually inhabited for thousands of years. It's not as if there was no one there in human history except for the Hebrews showed up for a bit and left. People lived nearby for thousands of years. So who knows what they've left behind. So this particular documentary, there are enough problems with it. It's not trustworthy, even though it may sound compelling. Well, something else skeptics point out. When archaeology, the Exodus, okay, but you know what? We've looked in Egypt and we've done a lot of archaeology. We have lots of records from pharaohs, and there's no reference we've ever found in Egypt to the Exodus or the plagues. Therefore, there's a gap in the history, the Bible that does not support the Bible, all these things happening. The Egyptians surely never mentioned it. So should we trust the Bible? Well, if anyone has ever looked at what these pharaohs left behind, how many times did they leave behind records of their failures or their embarrassments? Never. You don't do that. Would Egypt want to preserve a story about the humiliation of Egypt and its gods to these little slave people? No. I'm Pharaoh. I just lost my slave population and ruined my country, and our gods have been proven to be weak. And let's write all this down so everyone remembers for all time how weak and defeated Egypt was. And my name is Pharaoh. I'll sign it so they know how much of a failure I was as Pharaoh. No. Egypt, like every other country in antiquity, doesn't save those stories. Even if they lose a battle, they spin it to make it look like they won, or at least called it a draw. We shouldn't expect to find the Exodus in Egypt. They would not preserve that. And how many other events, anyway, happened that were not preserved? A few years ago, archaeologists digging in Canaan, in Israel, near the city of ancient Joppa, turned up a whole destruction layer of an Egyptian fort from Old Testament times, before Moses' time, apparently. And there was apparently an Egyptian military base there, completely destroyed and never rebuilt. The Canaanites had an uprising, destroyed the Egyptian force, and the Egyptians didn't come back. There's no record of that in history. No record in Egypt of this destruction, this rebellion that succeeded. So how many other events in history happened and there's no record of it in Egypt or anywhere else, like this rebellion? Just because we don't find something in history doesn't mean it didn't happen. In archaeology, if we know what to look for and dig in the right spots, sometimes it fills in gaps that we don't have in history. Big claims need big evidence, again. So how do we recognize real and fake? There's a lot of fake out there. How can we tell the difference? A few guidelines. Is it a huge sensational claim, like the real Mount Sinai discovered, or we found the ark, or this is the house Jesus grew up in? Things like that. Be wary, because what we actually have and what's claimed are two different things. When you make a big claim, people tend to pay attention. Television cameras or documentaries tend to show up, and people get their 15 minutes of fame or more. Some people are motivated by that, and they'll make big claims that are really there because it gets attention, and there's some people are motivated by that. So be wary. If it sounds too good to be true, probably it is. Does the person or the organization announcing this or claiming this, have they found other sensational things, like the Ark of the Covenant? Ryan Morrow has found the real Mount Sinai, the route of the Exodus. He also believes he's found the Ark of the Covenant. Amazing how this one guy finds all the big stuff. There's another one back in the 70s who popped up, a nurse esthetician, and I'm just blanking on his name. He claimed to have found Noah's Ark, he claimed to have found the Ark of the Covenant somewhere else, and he claimed to have found the real tomb of Jesus and other things. One person who has TV cameras, and he finds all the stuff that no one else has ever been able to find. That's a little too good to be true, a little too sensational. Don't trust those people. Is this person a trained archaeologist or a specialist of some kind? If not, don't just automatically believe everything they say. Doesn't mean they're automatically a bad person or that they're wrong, but it's easy to get things wrong. And if it's something, why wouldn't we bring in someone with training to make sure that I'm interpreting this right? Why wouldn't I do that? If I, for some reason, do not involve anyone who's trained, that's suspicious. Is it someone in the media or in the media business? Be careful, because they're not trained to do these things. And media people are trained to decide the conclusion first, then make the documentary or the TV show or whatever it is to lead to that conclusion you've already decided. You choose how the story is going to end, but make your episode and get to that point. Archaeologists are trained to look at the evidence and make your conclusion last. Do we see the difference? Just the way we're trained, even honest people, even believers who want to do good and do it right. How are we trained? Are we trained to look at the evidence and then see what the best conclusion is? Or are we trained to, what's our conclusion going to be? Okay, now how do we get there? Those paths are different. And it's easy to make even honest mistakes if we do the conclusion first and the path to it second. It's easy to make mistakes, even honest ones. So keep those guidelines in mind with fake archaeology. And some of it may turn out to be correct, but let's be careful about jumping on things too quickly just because they're announced or they're on the internet or a video comes out or someone we know is involved. You know, maybe it's true, but be cautious and use wisdom, because when we're wrong, it ends up working against the gospel, and we don't want that at all. And archaeology has many benefits for us in the gospel, and we'll talk in detail about some of those tomorrow. We have a few minutes here. Do we do the questions and answers after or before? Okay. Do any of you right now have any questions about anything? This session or something we've done earlier? Now's a chance to get a couple of perhaps before we wrap it up for the day. Anything we've talked about? Maybe there's someone on Zoom, but I don't know if answer, send questions in or not. We don't have a lot of time. And of course, I didn't tell you, have your questions ready. So, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about since Wednesday? Yes.
What would you say are the most significant? We have to pick like top three. What's significant archaeological finds?
The question is, what are, in my judgment, maybe the three most significant archaeological finds that support the Bible or that relate to the Bible? It's a judgment call, but I think one of the top ones is that inscription with the house of David that I've shown. Because David is a huge person in the Bible. And connects to Jesus, and the Bible talks a lot about him. And before that inscription, we didn't have any mention of archaeology with his name anywhere. And it had become a problem to some people. And then we find his name, not in a Jewish or Israelite context, we find his name written down by an enemy. And not too long after he lived. That's probably, most archaeologists would say that's probably number one. Right there. After that, it's really a judgment call. I'm kind of biased with the projects I've worked with, my sites. I say one of the big ones is maybe cumulatively the site where I worked 5 seasons, the city built in David's time, because that, with some other things too, the first real evidence we've had that there was a kingdom in Judah in David's time. And it's one thing to say David existed. It's another thing to say he actually had a kingdom, and they had record keeping and all these things the way the Bible describes it. And before 15 years ago before, there was evidence of almost none of that. And now there's lots of evidence So that's pretty big. I'd say one of the big ones, not from a really need to know, but the synagogue in Magdala, the synagogue that dates to Jesus' ministry that we talked about in the first session this morning. That doesn't really change anything. It doesn't really answer, did we believe in this or not? Now we know what to believe. In that sense, it hasn't changed anything. But to have a place that's so strongly, likely connected to Jesus himself, just has an awe factor that's pretty high. And that's a pretty big one to it. Any other questions on anything? Yes.
Made me think about like a couple of weeks ago where we talked about how like what would we expect to find, and it was pretty eye-opening to me because we were talking about like the context of history, where these were, they were forming, I guess centralized government, things like that. And it kind of made me think about like, I guess, a lot of illustrative Bibles and like children's Bibles and that sort of thing kind of be a certain kind of picture of what things are. And I still remember I had like one early on, it was like a blonde haired, blonde haired, like that sort of thing. And I was kind of curious, like, to be around, like, I don't know, something that's more representative or more accurate to the history of the archaeology, and any concerns with kind of the use of those kind of, I guess, illustrative, almost any fanciful kind of representations of that, any thoughts around that, like,
That's a good thing to wonder about. The question is, seeing these things gives us a more accurate visual representation, because the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus from some of the older movies, for example, that we get, in children's books or even adult things we look at in Bible times, pictures, paintings, images, how accurately, archaeology helps us get a better picture, know more what we're looking at. I think that does help. One benefit of archaeology, it helps us see more of the Bible and its surroundings, its events, from the perspective and from the eyes of the original people. We're separated by thousands of years of the other side of the world here. Big gaps. This closes those gaps. We see things through their eyes, more from their perspective. And it gets us closer to how the original audience saw things and understood things. And that helps our understanding. And it helps it, I think for some people, it could make it more real, more authenticity. And it's less Hollywood interpretation or popular artists interpreting, Michelangelo, God with the big gray beard, things like that. It helps us be more realistic, and it brings the Bible. When I look at it, it helps humanize the people. It's easy to read the Bible almost in the way like reading about Superman or Batman. These superheroes who have abilities or something that we couldn't possibly have. We're not on their level. The Bible, it's really about people just like you and me. It's not these superheroes. They're people like us. And archaeology is a tool to bring it down to our level where we can see ourselves. We can see where they lived. We can see where they walked, what they ate. And they're people like us. We can see what was going on at the time when they made their decisions. And that's kind of like the way I make my decisions sometimes. Or our culture makes decisions based on the same kinds of things. It's not like some superhero different era. It's us. And we can see ourselves in these people and in these stories. Archaeology really brings that, for me anyway. That's one of the biggest benefits. It helps humanize it and make it more relatable for us. Well, that's the time we have for now. It's time to wrap this up. But I was asked to offer an invitation again, and maybe something in this. There's so much fake news out there. What's real, what's not. Is the Bible really true? But we look at some of these things, and we do see how life really was and how grounded some of our, like baptism, how grounded a practice it really was. It wasn't something invented for Christians. John the Baptist, he was immersing people, mix the type of things, but in a river as a way to ritually purify themselves, repentance of sins, not in the name of Jesus yet, but our practice of baptism is taking that known practice, very common, and giving it a new definition. The cross, a symbol of execution, taken and repurposed as a symbol of hope. And the things we're talking about help us see those things as they can. And maybe something here has touched you. If it has, and you want to make anything known to the Christians here, do that while we stand and sing.